of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting to hear from witnesses on the study of federal assistance for various natural resource industries. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Taking screenshots now that we're in session is not allowed, or photos. A few comments, Charlie, before I get to you, unless it's a point of order on... Okay. A few comments for witnesses and members, because we have a number of departmental officials here today. Please wait till I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use, we don't have anybody in the room other than members, so we're good there. All comments should be addressed through the chair. And this is the study of federal assistance for the various natural resources industries. In accordance with the routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of our meeting today. Charlie, I'll go to you, and then we'll go into introduction of our witnesses and then to opening statements. So what's your, is this a point of order, as I said?
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Chair. I noticed on the witness list that was passed out that the Canadian Energy Regulator is not participating. Is that they were not able to come today? And are we able to have them rescheduled at one of the subsequent meetings?
I was going to get to that when I introduced the witnesses. Good question, and I did speak to Monsieur Samard about that. So the issue is that the executive team for the Canada Energy Regulator are all sick, including some apparently in quite bad shape. We have reached out, and we had reserved a slot for a week from Thursday. They came back and said that they have found people that they hope will be able to participate on this Thursday's panel. And so that will be confirmed when the notice for the Thursday meeting goes out, probably later today or tomorrow. So they will be appearing. It was supposed to be today, but we're hoping to get them with the agencies. And so we should be hearing from them as early as this Thursday. We do have appearing today representatives from the Department of Natural Resources, Business Development Bank of Canada, Canada Development Investment Corporation, Department of Finance, Department of Environment, and Export Development Canada. And what we'll do now is go into 5-minute opening statements from each of the departments. Then once we get into the opening statements, we'll get into our rounds of questions, starting with 6-minute rounds for each of the parties. So I believe Mr. Dufour from Natural Resources is going to speak first. So Mr. Dufour, I'll turn the floor over to you, and you have 5 minutes.
Bon après-midi, Monsieur.
Good afternoon to you, dear members of the Parliament.
I'm with Natural Resources Canada. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm joined by two of my Natural Resources Canada colleagues, Nada Verani and Monique Frison, as well as a number of other federal colleagues to share a perspective related to federal assistance to natural resource industries. I'm calling from Ottawa, located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. I'll be happy to quickly touch in my brief remarks on how we advance the sustainability and competitiveness of our natural resource industries as part of the global transition to net zero emissions by 2050. To achieve this goal, Natural Resources Canada is investing in sustainable energy, mining, and forestry initiatives. We're ensuring a just transition by moving forward with comprehensive action, including legislation, to support workers across the country. And we're advancing economic reconciliation in partnership with Indigenous people, communities, and businesses by ensuring their meaningful participation in Canada's net zero future. Through the regional energy and resource tables, we are working with provinces and territories to identify and accelerate key economic opportunities towards the low carbon economy. The government's recent investment in natural resource sectors contain numerous key tools that will enable such a strategy. We're investing nearly $4 billion in critical minerals to develop Canada's value chain from expanding mining and processing of strategic minerals to the manufacturing of products such as batteries, EVs, and solar panels. Through initiatives like the Smart Electrification Pathways Program, we're continuing to invest in clean energy expansion to green our grid and enhance generation capacity. We also recognize nuclear energy to be an important non-emitting and reliable source of electricity. That is why budget 2022 include close to 70 million to support activities to minimize waste generated from small modular reactors, to strengthen international nuclear cooperation agreements, and to enhance domestic safety and security policies and practices. What's more, we see hydrogen as a clear energy source central to meeting Canada's climate commitments. Budgets 2021 and 2022 included several important hydrogen investments, including the funding for projects under the Clean Fuel Funds, as well as under the Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada Net Zero Accelerator. We also have a proposal to expand the Canada Infrastructure Bank mandate to include in hydrogen production, transportation, and distribution. New incentives for zero emission vehicles purchase, which will include hydrogen powered vehicles, and new investor tax credits for CCUS and clean technologies. Regarding the oil and gas sector, support has been designed to help the industry decarbonize. During the pandemic, the government introduced targeted funding and programs in this sector to keep Canadians working while addressing environmental objectives. This includes an investment of 1.7 billion to address inactive and orphan wells. As well, our support includes a suite of initiatives to help Canada become the cleanest oil and gas producing country in the world, such as an investment of 319 million in research, development, and demonstration to advance CCUS technologies, and 1.5 billion to expand clean fuel production facilities. The government also recognized the challenges and growth opportunities in Canada's forest sector, which has received over 345 million since budget 2017 for innovation, market and product development, as well as economic development in Indigenous communities across the country. Budget 2022 included an additional 380 million to address the increasing threat of wildland fires and over 55 million to protect British Columbia's old growth forest. Finally, the 2 billion 3 program received a federal investment of 3.2 billion as part of the Natural Climate Solutions Fund. Canada, however, as we know, operates in a global system. A number of the budget 2022 investment that I mentioned will support Canada's energy transition and climate initiatives, but we know that more is needed, and so NRCan continues to actively explore additional measures to maintain the competitiveness for Canada's natural resource industries on the global stage. To conclude, transforming Canada's natural resource industries will take time, but the government is committed to positioning these sectors to advance our climate change commitments while building a cleaner, more inclusive and prosperous economy that works for everyone. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your opening statements. You didn't need it. You're just under the 5 minutes. For those who are presenting, I use a handy card system. So when I hold up the yellow card, it signifies you have 30 seconds left. And when the red card goes up, you're out of time. But don't stop mid-sentence. Just wind up your thoughts. So we're all good. We'll now go to next, which will be the 5-minute opening statement from the Business Development Bank of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members for the opportunity to be here. My name is Shannon Glenn, and I'm the AVP Government Relations for the BDC.
There's no need to give a lengthy introduction on the BDC, which has 75 years of experience, but let us recall that nevertheless, the BDC is the only bank solely dedicated to entrepreneurs. We're a Crown corporation which reports to Parliament through the Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development. We carry out our lender and investor activities at arm's length from the government. Thus, we act as a complement to private sector lenders rather than as a competitor. That means that we take on more risk than other financial institutions, and that when the economy falters, we step in. During the pandemic, for example, we provided in direct financial support $2.8 billion, as well as $4.5 billion indirectly in collaboration with financial institutions across the country. We also offer venture capital and advisory services.
Committee's interest on our support for natural resources, let me make a few comments. I would first highlight that our mandate is economy-wide and across Canada's geography. We offer solutions on commercial terms, meaning that we price for risk and do not undercut the private sector. We do not offer subsidies. And the uptake of our offering is demand-driven rather than on an allocation basis. Given our focus on entrepreneurs and debt, the uptake of our support in a given resource industry is typically not from the resource sector itself, but for the SME ecosystem around the sector. A clear example of this, for example, is the mining industry, where our lending last year was limited to one loan of $75,000 and where our portfolio stands at $2.7 million. Our typical focus in this sector is quarrying. We do not have any coal mines in our portfolio. That said, we support the SME industry that serves the mining industry, where we did 7.3 million authorizations last year, and the portfolio stands at 46 million as of the end of last fiscal year. Similarly, for oil and gas, BDC's lending to Canadian mid-sized oil and gas producers is about 500 million last year and represents about 1% of our portfolio, primarily through participating in syndicated transactions with Canadian banks in keeping with our complementary mandate. Of that, BDC provided 415 million in participations towards 5 billion in syndicated commitments from Canadian FIs, so a leverage ratio of close to 10 to 1. We also provide financing to oil and gas service providers. We have had a strong year with 244 million authorized in the last fiscal year, and the portfolio stands at $804 million. As a responsible lender, BDC's ongoing involvement is a leading driver of ESG due diligence integration in oil and gas lending practices, influencing producers towards energy diversification and enhance GHG transparency. As an existing lender, BDC is well positioned to provide additional support as producers progress their energy transition strategies, investing in emission reductions and clean technology to deliver low carbon energy solutions. This approach also favors energy safety and security, especially in light of recent geopolitical developments. On softwood lumber, we authorized 168 million last year, and the portfolio increased from 525 million in 2018 to 727 million in 2022, mainly driven by sawmills. On clean tech, we launched a $600 million fund in 2018 to address the lack of risk capital in the commercialization and scale up of Canada's clean tech industry. Since that fund is now fully committed, we announced just last week our new 400 million Climate Tech Fund 2 to continue to invest in Canadian clean tech firms. I just would like to close by highlighting some key challenges across sectors that are also relevant to the resource sector, and that is labor shortages and supply chain issues. We recently released a labor shortage study that concluded that labor shortages are here to stay, especially in light of the expected demand for workers. So BDC's solutions, advisory, productivity tool, digital adoption can definitely help in that regard. Last comment on supply chain delays and disruptions are impacting the operations of many companies, including in this sector, the resource sectors, though that is starting to normalize. We introduced a supply chain loan to help address current market gap. And I'd be happy to answer questions on that offering as well. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope this lays a frame for a fruitful discussion.
Great. Thank you for those opening comments. We'll move now to the representative for Canada Development Investment Corporation.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be joining you today at the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Elizabeth Wademan, and I'm the CEO of Canada Development Investment Corporation, or CDEV. I joined CDEV and became its president and CEO fairly recently, earlier this year in March 2022. CDEV is a Crown corporation that reports to Parliament through the Minister of Finance. CDEV's primary mandate is to serve as a vehicle for government equity investment and to manage the commercial holdings of the government. We carry out our activities and operate in a commercial manner. CDEV has a portfolio of subsidiaries that includes Trans Mountain Corporation, which was responsible for the Trans Mountain Pipeline and for completing the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. I would be pleased to answer your questions today. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Continuing right along, we will next move to the Department of Finance. And just so everybody knows, I believe that the panel members all decided the order here. So just going with the order I've been given. And so Department of Finance is next. And, I have three panelists. I'm not sure who's doing the opening statement. Is it Mr. Miller?
Yes, it is me. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I believe I will be providing the opening comments on behalf of my other colleagues from the department. Donc, il me fait plaisir.
So I'm pleased to join you within the context of the committee's study on federal assistance for various natural resources industries. I'm Samuel Miller, and I am the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister within the Economic Development Branch in the Department of Finance, Canada.
Information on our role within the Economic Development Branch. I wanted to acknowledge that I'm joined by my colleagues from the Tax Policy Branch, Miodrag Jovanovic, and also from the Crown Investment and Asset Management Branch, Marie-Josée Lambert. Our three branches have an active role in providing budget advice to the Minister of Finance on matters related to the fiscal and economic policy for a number of sectors across the economy, including the natural resources sector. In the Economic Development Branch, we support the Minister of Finance with advice on funding decisions for all domestic economic departments, including Natural Resources Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada, plus the Department of National Defence. In this capacity, we play a challenge function role on funding proposals from ministers from those departments. However, since the Minister of Finance is rarely the lead to implement such programs, we rarely administer funding and measures, and only with a few exceptions, other departments and agencies are the lead implementers following government funding decisions and parliamentary approval. So I know I have some colleagues from those departments. You already heard from Mr. Dufour, and you will be hearing from Mr. Fleming. Those are a couple of the departments that regularly implement programs in those sectors. That being said, environmental and climate change.
Sorry, if I could interrupt for a second, please, Mr. Miller. I've just noticed it looks like a vote has been called. Our vote. So I'm going to start up the clock. You have 3.5 minutes left. In order for us to continue, I do need unanimous consent from the committee. And I just, okay, I'm getting no. So we're going to have to suspend until after the vote. And for the members, obviously, if you want to go to the House to the chamber to vote, you're welcome to do that. Once the vote results are called, you have 10 minutes to get back for us to resume. And we do have 2 hours of time today, or up until 6 o'clock. And so we'll try to get through as many rounds as we can. And if we need to, because of this disruption, go to 6 o'clock or the 2 hours, we'll be able to do that. So we'll get back to you, Mr. Miller, when we resume. Hope everybody can stay with us until the vote's completed. And for now, we are suspended. we'll get right back into it with Mr. Miller having 3.5 minutes left in his opening statement. So if you're ready to go, Mr. Miller, we'll start the clock as soon as you start speaking.
Very well, thank you, Chair. I'll recommence right where I left off.
Thank you.
Environmental and climate change considerations are key ingredients in many of the government's decision-making processes, including its funding decisions. Such considerations are taken into account by departments and agencies when they develop funding requests, such as in relation to the annual budget. Indeed, it is mandatory by cabinet directive for each funding request submitted to the Minister of Finance to be accompanied by a strategic environmental assessment prepared by the lead department or agency. In addition, for the last year, the government has been piloting a climate lens to support funding and other decisions. This additional tool integrates enhanced climate analyses into the consideration of budget and cabinet proposals. At present, the pilot applies to proposals from 7 departments, including Natural Resources Canada. The Department of Finance is also responsible for advising the Minister of Finance on tax policy matters. While the primary role of the tax system is to raise revenue to finance government services, programs, and transfers, it may also directly be used as an instrument to achieve economic and social objectives. With respect to natural resources, over the recent years, the tax system has been used to deliver certain government policies aimed at facilitating Canada's transition to a net zero economy. This includes the introduction of a new investment tax credit for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, a reduction of 50% in the federal tax rate on income derived from the manufacturing of certain net zero technologies and clean energy production, as well as a new enhanced mineral exploration tax credit for critical minerals. More recently, the government announced the introduction of a new refundable investment tax credit for clean technologies, as well as its intention to consult on a carbon intensity-based approach to support the production of clean hydrogen. These measures play an important role in supporting the transition to a net zero economy, while ensuring Canada remains competitive in attracting investment in key areas such as clean technologies and renewable energy. That concludes, Chair, our comments from the Department of Finance, and we'd be pleased to take the committee's questions.
Great, thank you. And I do want to apologize to all of our panelists for the disruption today, and thank you for staying with us. We'll now move to our representative from the Department of Environment and Climate Change Canada. I believe it's, if you're ready, I will start the clock for 5 minutes when you get started.
Je vous remercie de m'avoir.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here today, Mr. Chair, and thank you too for your public service, including within the context of your efforts on this committee. I am Jessie Fleming, and I'm Director General of the Programmes Directorate in the Climate Change Branch of Environment and Climate Change Canada. My team and myself are responsible for administering grant and contribution programming related to driving greenhouse gas emission reductions. In that context, I would like to highlight 2 programs that may be of interest to this committee today and for which natural resource industry stakeholders are potentially eligible for federal assistance.
Highlight is the Low Carbon Economy Fund, or LCEF, which was funded for up to $2 billion as part of Budget 2017. The Low Carbon Economy Fund supports projects that help reduce Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, generate clean growth, build resilient communities, and create good jobs for Canadians. These projects are critical as Canada continues to build a sustainable net zero emissions economy towards 2050. As announced in Canada's 2030 Emissions Reduction Plan and Budget 2022, the Government of Canada committed to expanding the Low Carbon Economy Fund by investing an additional $2.2 billion over 7 years, starting in 22-23. The Low Carbon Economy Fund invests in a wide range of recipients, including provinces and territories, businesses, municipalities, not-for-profits, and Indigenous communities and organizations. Successful applicants leverage ingenuity across the country to reduce emissions in support of Canada's climate plans. The second program I'd like to highlight is called the Output-Based Pricing System, OBPS, Proceeds Fund, funded from proceeds from the federal Output-Based Pricing System. The Government of Canada has committed to return proceeds collected from the output-based pricing system to jurisdictions of origin as part of carbon pollution pricing efforts. Provinces and territories that have voluntarily adopted the output-based pricing system can opt for a direct transfer of proceeds collected. Proceeds collected in other backstop jurisdictions, current or past, will be returned through two program streams. The Decarbonization Incentive Program is a merit-based stream that incentivizes the long-term decarbonization of Canada's industrial sectors by supporting clean technology projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Proceeds collected from most facilities regulated by the federal output-based pricing system will be returned via this stream. The second stream is called the Future Electricity Fund, and it's designed to support clean electricity projects and/or programs. Proceeds collected from output-based pricing system covered electricity generating facilities, utilities generally speaking, are expected to be returned through funding agreements with governments or third parties in relevant jurisdictions. I'll end it there in the interest of leaving as much time as possible for questions and discussion, but thank you again for the opportunity to be here today.
Great, thank you for your nice, tight comments. It's appreciated. Lastly, we're going to hear from Export Development Canada. So when you're ready, I will start your 5 minutes. The floor is over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Todd Winterholt, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications, Marketing, and Corporate Strategy Officer at EDC. We're delighted to be here today to contribute to the committee's study of financial assistance to the natural resources sectors in Canada. EDC is a Crown corporation and Canada's official credit agency, and we're mandated to grow Canadian trade and develop global business opportunities. As a result, our focus is international, and we have 21 offices around the world, including a full branch operating in Singapore. These offices, combined with an additional 21 locations across Canada, help to ensure that EDC meets its mandate of supporting Canadian companies seeking success in almost every market around the world, and that these companies come from every region across our country. We also support Canadian companies of all sizes, from the very small to multi-billion-dollar corporations, using our financing, equity, credit insurance, contract bonding, trade knowledge, and global connections products and services. And last year in 21, EDC served nearly 30,000 Canadian companies doing business in over 180 countries around the world. As committee members may be aware, and like our sister Crown Corporation, BDC, EDC does this operating on commercial terms. The funds we use for our export financing are drawn from our revenues, and consistent with this model, EDC does not provide grants or subsidies. In fact, throughout our history, EDC has consistently been profitable, which is both a point of pride within the organization and a reality we embrace, driven by our commercial mandate and the need to move at the speed of business. In our 78 plus years of operations, EDC has helped facilitate more than $1.5 trillion of Canadian exports and international investment. Since our founding in 1944, EDC's business has also tended to reflect the size and nature of the Canadian economy. And for much of our history, as natural resources drove Canada's economy, they also made up the majority of our lending and insurance portfolios. Today, though, as the economy grows and diversifies, so does EDC, such that our current portfolio and activity reflects sectors as wide-ranging as the economy itself. It's perhaps also useful to understand that EDC solutions are almost always provided in coordination and partnership with the many financial institutions that back Canada's exporters, their banks, co-ops, and credit unions. Because so much of this work is complementary with what banks do, EDC's business activity has a tendency to be counter-cyclical. That is, during economic downturns, when private capital gets tight, demand for EDC's risk mitigation and financing products increases. And I can quickly touch on a few examples. As part of the Team Canada response to the COVID-19 pandemic, EDC augmented efforts to support Canadian companies in the oil and gas sector. This commercial support delivered liquidity to businesses in exploration and production, as well as midstream operations and oil field service companies, to help with the sudden and severe contraction in market conditions caused by lockdowns. In addition, and over the past 6 years alone, EDC has taken part in similar efforts that go beyond our core business offerings to provide support for industries in Canada's natural resources sectors when it's been needed. For example, helping the Canadian canola industry in 2019, for aluminum and steel producers in 2018, stepping in for softwood lumber producers in 2017, and oil and gas support in 16 and 2018. Under more typical circumstances, EDC continues to play a role in supporting Canada's natural resources and related sectors. We are currently engaged with more than 1,000 Canadian exporters in forestry, mining, agriculture, and energy sectors. It is noteworthy, though, to point out that of these sectors, oil and gas is one in which EDC's involvement has trended downward. This is particularly true in our financing of international companies and projects in the fossil fuels industry. More specifically, in 2018, for example, we provided approximately $2.7 billion in direct financing to foreign-based companies in the sector. But by July of this year, that number had decreased by over 85% to $395 million. As part of our commitment to the Government of Canada's carbon reduction plans and our own commitment to achieve net zero by 2050, effective January 1 of next year, EDC will no longer finance new international oil and gas projects. That said, one area there we will continue to invest in is in our support of Canadian companies that provide products, services, or technologies that help reduce the GHG footprint of these international companies. Domestically, EDC continues to work with hundreds of companies, large and small, across the energy sector. Their expectation is that Canada's transition to a lower carbon economy must be orderly, and that companies engaged in the transition will require significant capital to make the green investments that are needed. In the same way we are working with industries across the sector, EDC believes we can play a significant role in helping oil and gas to make its transition to a lower carbon Canadian economy. Certainly, Canada's natural resource sector is complex and dynamic, and over the course of Canada's history, the sector has played a key role in the economic growth and global influence of Canada as a producer of precious raw materials, food, and energy, all much in demand the world over. This certainly remains the case today and will continue to be the case for years to come. Over this time, our goal at EDC has remained the same: to help Canadian resource companies find international opportunities, to grow their businesses, diversify their markets, and find success that meets the highest standard for sustainable business. EDC remains excited to support Canada's natural resource industries and to help them build towards a productive and sustainable future. Thank you again for the invitation to appear today.
Great, thank you. As we get ready to go into our first round of questions, which will be 6 minutes each, I neglected to welcome Mr. Schmale and Mr. Arnaud to our committee today. So good to see you here filling in. Thanks so much. So first up, we have Ms. Stubbs for her 6 minutes of questioning. And for those who haven't been at a committee before, it's been a while, we'll allow the person questioning to direct their questions. If you have something to weigh in on, you can put your hand up, but I'll leave it very much to the person doing the line of questioning to decide where they're going to direct their questions. So, Ms. Stubbs, over to you. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Certainly a large, wide-ranging, and esteemed panel, so thanks for lending us your time. I guess maybe I'll start with the representatives from Finance. But if anybody else wants to throw in on this, just feel free to do so. I'm just wondering if you can, for the purpose of clarity of language, define the word subsidy for this committee.
You're going to have to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry for this. Thank you for your question. So I'm Mio Jovanovic. I'm Assistant Deputy Minister Tax Policy at Finance. So we can, one way to define that is to use the WTO definition of a subsidy, which generally means a financial assistance provided to a sector or in the form also of services. I have here some quote I can take. It includes financial benefits provided to businesses or industries, including direct transfers, foregone revenues, transfer of risk and provision of goods and services. So that is one way to approach the notion of subsidy.
Thank you. And so can I just clarify, would the Department of Finance, would you consider tax or fiscal measures like deductions, credits, accelerated capital cost allowances, flow-through share provisions, those kinds of measures, would they fall under what you would either formally or as a representative of the Department of Finance consider to be a subsidy?
Yeah, thank you again for your question. It's, I mean, I think that the way you phrase the question is a bit, I mean, it's a bit broad. You've included different types of expenditures there. I think you really have to look at the nature of the expenditure of spending. In terms, when you look at tax measures, for instance, there are a number of measures that are really just there to properly measure the amount of income subject to tax, right? I mean, it's what we call the benchmark tax system. So typically, a business is allowed to claim deductions for normal expenses, whether it's wage or depreciation for capital. There are what we call tax expenditures provisions, which are really departures from the benchmark. And we tend to look at these differently because, I mean, they are departure from the benchmark. You mentioned flow-through share, for instance. That is a departure. So in this context, they would typically be seen more as a kind of subsidy or special assistance, if you will. Just to go a bit beyond on the flow-through share, for instance, in last budget, we did announce the phase out the flow-through share for oil and gas and coal exploration.
Thanks for that response. Yeah, I think sometimes in this conversation, different proponents are talking past each other based on exactly this kind of lack of clarity around the definition of what we mean when we say the word subsidy. I think also to finance or to natural resources, or both, whichever is appropriate. I'm just trying to get a sense, first of all, of the contribution to GDP and also to exports broken down by sector of oil, gas, quarrying, forestry, fishing, agriculture, and hunting. And if that's not possible right off the top of your head, which seems eminently reasonable to me, if you could please provide that to the committee in a written submission.
I think, Chair, we could probably, Danielle, that would be something that Department of Finance could take as an undertaking, Chair, and we could come back to the committee in writing on that.
I think just to Finance, if I may add, we actually have data that we can certainly follow up with in terms of an employment, GDP, and exports as it relates to the energy, forest, mineral, and metals sector. So that's data that's available, absolutely,
okay,
for 2021 and earlier years as well.
Thank you. I think we sure would appreciate that for the purposes of this study. And now I'd like to just get a sense of, according to the North American Industry Classification System, I'm looking for the comparative value of taxes paid per year against the value of tax deductions and credits per year. And what I'm hoping is that somebody from Finance or Natural Resources will be able to provide that for oil and gas extraction and support activities, agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting, the manufacturing sector, the real estate sector, the construction sector, and the finance and insurance sector. I don't know if that's possible to outline that right now for the committee, but also hope that that could be provided in a written submission.
So maybe I can take this. It is possible for us to probably have an assessment of the tax paid by these subsectors. I mean, your question about the relationship between, I think you mentioned like the total tax deduction compared to what they paid. I don't think we can really do that. I mean, there are limitations in being able to do that. The tax system is based on self-assessment, and corporations do report their net taxable income. They also do report some fields that are required to reconciliate book income with taxable income, for instance, but they're not obligated to report all their items in what led to necessarily like in their financial statements, if you will, led to taxable income. So there's some limitation there.
And we're out of time.
And also, I'm not sure about the what it would how to interpret this either.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're out of time,
So-
but we may get back to another round, and then Ms. Stubbs could clarify, or we could send the clarification through the clerk to you and see if you are able to provide any information. Okay, so thanks. We'll move now to Ms. DeBruzen, who will have 6 minutes.
Thank you. I think I'd like to begin to ask a question for natural resources, because one of the things that I find really interesting is the piece about electrification. So much of the work that we do when we're talking about zero emission vehicles and other types of things like that is to move more as we reduce emissions to a cleaner electrical grid. We're pretty lucky in Canada because I believe that we have a very clean grid already at about 83% non-emitting. But there's more work to do, and I'm curious about how we're working to get to that point of cleaning up the remaining 17%. So I was looking for natural resources. There's the Smart Renewables and Electrification Pathways program, and I was hoping that I could get some more details about that program.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the good question. With respect to energy, well, electrification. So I mean, there's certainly, as the member mentioned, there's certainly more that needs to be done in terms of electrification of the entire grid. And I think one mean that we're trying to get through this is, as I mentioned in my remarks, my introduction remark, is really the launch of these regional energy and resource tables, whereby we sit down with provincial territorial counterparts and we agree on what are some of the kind of the most critical pillars on which we want to action to really achieve achieve our goals for 2030, 2050 in terms of GHG reduction, and across the board, electricity is certainly coming up as how do we go about increasing power generation. So it is definitely an issue that's very much at heart at NRCan, and that we're looking at actively right now through, in part, these tables that will result in action.
I'm just going to jump in, sorry, because I don't have much time, and I really appreciate that. But and I'm happy to hear about it being, an important part of the regional energy and resource tables. But my question is, I believe that there's a Smart Renewables and Electrification Pathways program that you mentioned, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the types of projects that are being funded by that program.
Okay, absolutely, and would be happy to provide you with a list of projects that are being funded through the Smart Renewable and Electrification Pathway program. So basically, the program is about advancing smart renewable energy and grid modernization projects to enable the clean grid for the future. So it's a very key one in terms of, to your point, in terms of electrification. The funding, initially was of about 964 million over 4 years, which was announced back in 2020. In budget 2022, this program was recapitalized with an additional 600 million over 7 years to 2029. So in terms of project solicitation, there has been a very large number of applications received in the first place in terms of, so now we're proceeding with continuous intake process. The program is at this point, because it's been so much solicited, is no longer not accepting new applications at the present time. So just want to kind of provide a bit more detail on it, and would be happy to follow up in written form with some of the projects.
I don't know if you'd be able to answer this today, but if you can't, then I would like to know if there's one province that has received more project support through that program than any other province.
I'm not in position to answer that today, but we will follow up with that information.
Thank you. I'm going to share my time with Madame Lapointe.
Thank you. My question is to the Department of Natural Resources. The world wants critical minerals, and more specifically, the world wants Canada's critical minerals. So I'm curious to know what investments has Natural Resources made to develop the technologies and the processes for sustainable mining?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the questions. I think we certainly recognize the important role of the mining industry in driving our country's economic prosperity, while also ensuring environmental stewardship and protection. We have a strong, very robust regulatory system, for mining, but through environmental impacts. But we recognize that investments in innovation are certainly very, very, very key. One mechanisms by which we seek to really support sustainable mining is the NRCan Green Mining Innovation, which is specifically looking at improving the mineral sector's environmental performance and really looking at creating green technology opportunities. And this is really done in partnerships with provincial territorial governments, industry, academia, non-government organizations, such as the Canada Mining Innovation Council. So that's kind of a great way by which we try to foster really innovation in that space. With respect to the question in terms of its investments, and there are programs, I can mention the Challenge program that's been launched under the Impact Canada initiative back in 2017, 75 million over 6 clean tech challenges, and one of them was on mining, the Crush It Challenge. And again, 5 million was awarded under that initiative to the Canadian Mining Innovation Council. So, there has been definitely some investment, definitely a strong push from the department, but we'll be happy to follow up with the committee in terms of providing further detail in terms of can we actually delineate specifically the level of funding that has been allocated towards sustainable mining. But there are certainly some data that can be provided there.
Great, thank you. We're going to go now to Monsieur Simard. Monsieur Simard, vous avez 6.
You have 6 minutes, Mr. Simard. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, Mr. Winterhout, in your presentation, you talked about the different sectors that you've assisted, and you referred back to 2016, I believe, for the mining sector. I wonder would it be possible for you to provide us with the breakdown of the assistance that's been given by the EDC to the different natural resources sectors, such as the forestry sector, gas and oil sector, as well as the electricity sector. Would it be possible for you to give us a breakdown of the assistance that you have granted to these different natural resources sectors since 2016?
I think you're on mute, or you may need to
your boom microphone needs to be lowered.
Let's try that. Is that better?
Perfect, yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will try and give a quick summary today, and happy to provide the clerk with some additional information dating back to 2016 as requested. I can state today, for example, in the forestry sector, EDC currently serves.
Sorry, I don't have much time, Mr. Winterholt. Could you please provide us with a document on that? Would it be possible to do that for the EDC? Yes? Thank you very much. If you've taken note of that, thank you. So now, Mr. Winterholt, often I hear people saying, for example, the oil change report, that supporting the oil and gas sector in Canada can come to 14 billion per year, and that you are one of the main contributors to the oil and gas sector. I very much understand what you've said, that you're not giving any grants or contributions, but you do give assistance. Do you think that's a representative figure, 14 billion per year, in terms of the EDC assistance, the oil and gas sector? Would that be an approximate amount?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. I could say certainly as of 2021, that number it would not be accurate from our perspective. In 2021, EDC provided approximately $4.3 billion in support to domestic and international companies in the oil and gas sector. Interesting to note, that was also the first year that our support to clean tech actually eclipsed the amount of support provided to oil and gas. That number has come down from approximately $12 billion about 5 years ago, as I say now, to roughly $4.3 billion in 2021.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Recently read in Le Devoir, and I think it's figures that you provided, that for the first trimester it was 1.360 billion for the oil and gas sector that came from EDC. So if that was the case, then we would be going beyond the assistance that was granted as a total in 2021. So this financial assistance, is it compatible with the government's commitment to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies by 2023? Because for me, 2023 is tomorrow morning. So the financial portrait that you currently have, is it compatible with the government's objective to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies by 2023?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, we would say that it is compatible with the government's intent as described under the COP26 agreements. And as I mentioned earlier in my introductory comments, EDC will achieve zero new direct international financing support for oil and gas by January 1. That is on target. We have reduced the current amount from $2.7 billion in 2018 to $395 million this year. And we can confirm there will be no new direct international support for oil and gas from EDC effective January 1.
Well, perhaps simply a small clarification. You know that government has committed to end non-efficient subsidies. And I'm saying that the EDC gives us subsidies. I know we won't agree on that. But in terms of assistance in the EDC, are you thinking about the assistance that would not be efficient? In the EDC, do you have a definition of what is inefficient in terms of what you would give to the oil and gas sector?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, when we look at, I think maybe perhaps I'll start by saying we would agree that EDC does not provide subsidies. Our definition really derives from the World Trade Organization and OECD in terms of how we operate on commercial principles. So we would say, first, as a first point, we do not provide subsidies. Where we do see an opportunity, I think, to continue to aid Canadian companies in the transition to a lower carbon future is through providing support to our clean tech exporters as they seek to help reduce GHG levels with their counterparts, either domestically in Canada or certainly internationally. So we would see ourselves working to mitigate and minimize the carbon footprint from companies across the sector.
Well, I've got a quick final question for the representatives from the Finance Department. Often the Deputy Minister, Prime Minister, has said that the money invested in the pipeline and the returns on these investments would fund clean tech, but in fact the pipeline is just generating deficits. So how can we reinvest deficits in clean tech?
Bonjour, merci pour la question.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that question. We are continuing. Just a moment. So the acquisition of Trans Mountain by the government was a commercial transaction between the government and Kinder Morgan at the fair market value, as confirmed by the evaluation of the assets by the Parliamentary Budget Office in 2019. Trans Mountain has and will continue to be operated on a business footing, and the government said in February that it would not spend any extra public money on this project. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're out of time there on that one. We're going to go now to Mr. Angus, who will have 6 minutes for his round of questions.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for coming. This is a lot of information. I wish we had hours to go through this. I would like to start off, Mr. Winterhall. At COP26, Canada signed the Glasgow Statement. It was a landmark commitment to stop the providing public financing for fossil fuel projects abroad and to prioritize support for clean energy by the end of 2022. And Canada remains the largest international financier of fossil fuels in the world, more than China, more than the United States, more than the UK, France, Germany, and Italy combined. And the EDC is the main driver of this financing. So how are we going to respect that Glasgow Statement through your work of continuing to provide financial support to the oil sector?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Certainly, I think, as we move towards a zero target for January of next year, in terms of EDC's ability to provide additional financing to international fossil fuel companies, I believe that we will be fully aligned with the government's view with respect to the language in the COP26 statement. I would also add that a great lion's share of the remaining support to our domestic oil and gas industry is to really aid in the transition to a lower carbon economy and to make sure that we are linking EDC's support of clean technologies as a way to do that.
So when I look at the report that recently came out from Oil Change International, it looks what's being given to oil and gas compared to clean tech seems to be a huge disproportion. So when you talk of clean tech, are you talking about investments in the oil and gas sector to reduce the amount of carbon, or are you talking about new separate clean energy development projects?
From EDC's perspective, it would include both. So, for example, investment in renewable energy, wind, hydro, solar, as well as product, services, technologies that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions in any sector. It could also include oil and gas and other natural resources, mining, for example.
Okay, could you provide us a breakdown of what is actually going to wind and hydro and geothermal as compared to money that's going to what I would think are very profitable oil companies to reduce their carbon footprint? That would be very, very helpful. The Oil Change International report has different numbers than yours. They were saying that Canada was providing on average about 11.3 to 13 billion annually in government-backed support for international fossil fuel projects and for Canadian expansion. What they are showing from the Export Development Canada in 2022 is a figure of 15.4 billion. And a lot of that is the $10 billion backstop for TMX. So would that be an accurate number?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So I'll defer on the specifics with respect to the pipeline, which is purview of the Department of Finance in this case. But certainly the 5.5 billion is getting closer to our actual numbers. So again, last year.
Okay, so sorry, I just have to interrupt here because I'm running out of time. So that 5 billion is accurate, but are you going to confirm whether EDC was involved in the $10 billion loan I asked you about?
So I can for sure say that it was $4.3 billion last year, to be very specific, so considerably down from where we had been 5 years ago. And with respect to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, I think my colleagues at Department of Finance probably better positioned to answer that question.
But all I'm asking is, was EDC, did you supply $10 billion for TMX? That's a simple question.
So we act
that's what the reports say.
We act as agent of Canada for all purposes with respect to Canada account, and so that is a file that's fully run by the Department of Finance.
Thank you. I'll take it.
So I'd say then what they said was a 15.4 billion. I'm just finishing off, my time's running out. So I'd say that was a pretty accurate number. So I guess I find it really hard to believe that suddenly all the money taps are going to turn off and we're going to meet our international commitments when I'm looking at a $15 spending spree this year to backstop oil and gas. This is not in line with what the Prime Minister has promised the international community. So I am concerned about that. I also just want to change in the few minutes I have left. We had the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers come before us, and they said that their vision for dealing with the climate crisis was to increase Canadian oil and gas exports. You hired Dave Collier, the former president of CAP, to your board. I believe he's Environmental, Social, and Governance Advisory Council. So would you say that the views of CAP and EDC are in line in terms of their vision that we need to vastly increase export of Canadian oil and gas as a response to the climate crisis?
Thank you for the question. I certainly think we do value Mr. Collier's perspective as part of a broad perspective from a variety of industry, civil society, government, and private industry groups on our ESG Advisory Council. It is one voice among a number in the table. And just perhaps to be very clear, EDC will no longer support international direct fossil fuel financing as targeted in COP26 statement by January 1. We are on track to be there.
But you are still subsidizing oil and gas to be able to market it as a lower carbon emission than it is. So that is still giving money to oil and gas. I'm just interested because CAP seems to think their solution to the climate crisis is vastly increasing exports. He's on your ESG advisory board, but I also understand it has to do with providing financing and connecting Canadian companies to international markets. So is EDC very much in line with the CAP vision of increasing oil and gas as a way of dealing with the climate crisis?
And I'll just say briefly, please, we're approaching the end of the time here, so we'll give you a couple minutes.
Certainly, EDC's mandate is to serve all Canadian companies, regardless of sector. We do that very much in line with the government's instruction with respect to its COP26 commitments, and we see a real opportunity to assist Canadian companies in the oil and gas sector to transition to a lower carbon future as they go forward.
Thank you.
All right, colleagues, we're at just coming up on 5:30. A next round would take us 15 minutes. So are we, I think we have a substitute coming in, so that'll give, 2 5 minutes and 2.5 minutes. So yeah, let's do that and we'll see where that takes us. But so let's move right into the next 5-minute round, and Mr. Patzer, you're up first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to everyone for being here. Just the Department of Finance, can you confirm the amount of total tax revenue from the oil and gas sector to the federal government in 2021?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will have to get back to you on this. I don't have the number with me.
5 years prior to that as well, too, just in the total revenue to the federal government. I would greatly appreciate that. Just wondering if you can tell us as well, what effect did tax revenue from the oil and gas sector have on the federal budget and deficit over the last year? Do you know?
Sorry, I mean, I don't have a direct answer to that actually. I mean, you're asking for.
We're looking at how much revenue.
Asking for tax revenues.
So when we consider, what budget projections were, and then we see how much revenue came in from the oil and gas sector, what impact did that have on the projected deficits that the government's running?
Yeah, that's a question I will have to defer to my colleagues in the fiscal policy branch that are not on this call. So I can take this with me and see what can be provided to the committee.
Okay, if you can get us a report on those numbers to the committee, that would be fantastic. I've got another quick question for you, since you're a tax policy guy. I've previously asked the Finance Department for the specific number of tax that's collected on the carbon tax. And I'm just wondering if you have a number for how much GST is collected on the carbon tax.
We don't have that number, actually. I mean, the way the carbon tax works along with the GST is there's no separate tracking of the amount. I mean, often it's buried in the final price, and GST will be charged on the final price of the product. So there's no there's no accounting that allows us to even calculate that amount. The other thing is, I mean, it's not clear what that amount would represent because people would have spent that money elsewhere on goods and services that very likely on which would have GST would have been charged anyway. So the differential is not clear either. So that's why we just don't have that number.
Okay, because it is a individual line item when people are paying their energy bills, when they're paying their power bills, they're individual lines. So I think it would actually wouldn't be that hard to track it, honestly. But maybe on your guys' end, maybe it's just not part of the program, I guess, maybe. But anyways, thank you very much. I will move on. I got a question for BDC, and we're talking about environmental social governance. I'm just curious, do you look at the life cycle emissions of a project before you'll finance it, rather than just, for example, people say that wind and solar are these amazing green energy sources, but when you look at the life cycle, I'm just curious, do you look at what the total footprint is from the construction to the teardown of these projects as well?
So thank you for the question. The financial support we provide is aimed at improving the internal operations within each company and can include funding for long-term initiatives to reduce emissions, invest in production equipment to lower diesel usage. These are all examples: minimize and remediate land disturbances, increase the use of recycled water, and so on. So producers are increasingly directing capital to these various projects intended to improve their operating efficiency and lower greenhouse gases. Whether it
okay, so
those
basically
are inherently life cycle considerations for their products.
Right. Yeah, I'm just curious because there's several yards and tonnage of concrete that goes into every wind turbine tower. The amount of steel that goes into them is massive, and we know that concrete is one of the largest GHG emitters in the world. So I'm just curious if you guys bothered to put that into your analysis, but I guess not. I think my last question is going to be to natural resources quickly. There was a 2-year delay in developing just transition policy because of COVID, but yet we're not seeing the timelines move by 2 years for all these towns, for all these communities, and for these sectors that are going to be obliterated by the just transition, especially in the coal industry. So I'm just wondering how you can justify a 2-year delay without actually giving a 2-year reprieve to these communities.
Sorry,
yeah, if Natural Resources wants to, and we're at the end of the 5 minutes, but I'll give you a bit of time to answer briefly, and then we'll move on to the next questioner.
Okay. Well, I'll just say, some measures have been announced around the just transition in terms of creating more sustainable jobs in a low carbon economy. There's measures around the emissions reduction plan. Some funding through budget 2021. I'm just, the recent creation through the fall economic statement of a sustainable job secretariat, and I think they will look at some of the issues that have been mentioned. So I'm just not entirely clear. I'm able to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Just want to briefly welcome Ms. Gallant to our committee. And now we're going to go to Mr. Shahal for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for all the witnesses for joining us today. And I was excited to see the fall economic statement, this document. And I've been reading through it. And I was pleasantly pleased with actually the whole document. But there's one section that really caught my eye. And that's when we think about my province, home province of Alberta, my city of Calgary, and my constituency of Calgary Skyview. When you think about workers and the opportunity for better wages for workers and sustainable jobs, I've never seen this in my one year of time in office here be included in an investment tax credit. And so on page 30, there's an investment tax credit for clean technologies and an investment tax credit for clean hydrogen. I'm wondering if the member from Department of Finance can talk about the inclusion of, to incentivize companies to certain labor conditions will be eligible for an increased tax credit if they provide increased wages and ensure apprenticeship or training opportunities, increasing wages for workers and providing sustainable jobs.
Yes, thank you for the question. So you're right, two credits announced, two investment tax credits, and the labor conditions would apply to both. Maybe I can take the investment tax credit for clean technologies as a starting point. The investment tax credit is being proposed at 30% rate. In order to obtain that 30% rate, the taxpayer would have to demonstrate that it meets these requirements. As you mentioned, they would be around ensuring that workers are paid at the prevailing wages. And there would also be conditions around ensuring that maybe a proportion of hours worked are being performed by apprentices. That's kind of one approach used in the United States. We will be consulting on that. So the final conditions will be spelled out in the budget. But as for now, in the fall economic statement, what was mentioned there is that these conditions would be around these two criteria.
That been done before here in Canada?
In Canada, my understanding is that the concept of prevailing wages is being used in a context of foreign workers program to make sure that when employers hire foreign workers, that it's not done in a way that undercut Canadian wages. So it is a concept that is being used there. I do not believe it has been used in other context, and I do not believe that the labor requirement around apprentices is used either.
I think it's a great initiative. Thank you, and I commend you and your department's work for supporting workers and better wages for workers, particularly in my region, who is going through an energy transition, and we've seen the launch of the Energy Transition Center as well recently. Chair, I'd like to provide the rest of my time to my colleague, Ms. Lapointe.
Thank you. 1 minute. Quick question then to natural resources. So we know that natural resources green mining innovation has a goal of helping Canada's mining sector towards decarbonization. So I'd like to hear how the department or the ministry is realizing that goal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with respect to the green mining innovation, what the work that's happening there is really working closely, again, as I mentioned earlier on, with provincial territorial governments, with industry, with academia, with non-government organizations, and any other interested stakeholders at ways by which we can improve again the mineral sectors around its environmental performance and really create green tech opportunities. So really, it's an effort of sitting down with these groups and coming together with joint project that can be launched. And a key partner in this work is really the organization I mentioned before, the Canada Mining Innovation Council. So it's really looking at what are some of the innovations we need to see implemented in the mining sector to, again, have a better environmental performance. So you're thinking of projects like how we go about enhancing mine productivity, managing, minimizing water and mine waste in the mining cycle, improving energy efficiency of the mines, and all of these initiatives go, a certain distance, certainly, in helping decarbonize the industry.
Okay, thank you. We're out of time on that one, and so now we're going to go to Mr. Simard, and the next 2 or 2.5 minutes. So for any of our panelists taking questions, keep in mind that it's a very tight amount of time for our next 2 questioners. So Mr. Simard, over to you for 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Mr. Winterholt, quickly, I heard you say earlier that in January there would be no more EDC financing for the oil and gas sector. And I'd just like to read out a sentence because I know that Minister Guilbeault, during the electoral campaign, said that the signal we're sending is very clear. The Canadian government no longer support financing of oil and gas as of 2023, whether by direct or indirect mechanisms or with any tax shelters. So does that mean that the EDC will no longer support the oil and gas sector as of January, directly, indirectly, or via tax sheltering? Could you perhaps say yes or no?
EDC will continue to support the oil and gas sector, but we will stop financing directly international fossil fuel projects as agreed to in the COP26 statement.
Okay,
so indirectly and via tax sheltering, there will still be assistance. Have I correctly understood?
Correct. We will continue to provide assistance to the oil and gas sector on commercial terms.
Okay, thank you. Very quickly, now for the Department of Finance and also Natural Resources, you know that the Sustainable Development Commissioner, Mr. DeMarco, has said that your departments did not have any clear definition of what actually constitutes an inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. And once again, Minister Guilbeault said that by mid-2023, there would no longer be any inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. So that would suppose that that's within 8 months. That's a very short deadline. So currently, do you have a definition? And perhaps you could answer in writing if we don't have enough time today. Do you currently have a definition of what constitutes an inefficient subsidy?
Nous travaillons.
We are working on formalizing the definition within the context of the review that we're doing with Argentina, and we want to finalize all of that in 2023. That's our aim. So we're working very hard on that. I'd just like to mention that in parallel, the government is not prevented from taking decisions such as those related to the flow-through shares, so to eliminate subsidies that are considered to be inefficient within that context. And since 2007, we've eliminated 9 inefficient subsidies in the tax system. Perhaps, my time has run out. So perhaps we could have an answer from the Minister of Finance, the Department of Finance.
So if it's possible to get a response briefly or submitted in writing. If it...
Écrit?
By writing? Could you please give us an answer in writing? Sorry, as I've just said, we are working on formalizing the definition within the context of the review that we're doing with Argentina. Nothing has been made public. It's still work that we're doing internally. The aim is to finalize that project in 2023. Thank you.
That clarification. We'll go now to Mr. Angus for his 2.5 minutes. So, Mr. Angus, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair. Ms. Wademan, I was very interested in your presentation on TMX, but I seem to have missed, I didn't hear much on it, and I thought that was unfortunate. I read the PBO report on the projected cash flows for the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and they had contacted the CDIC asking for more information, and that was refusing the Parliamentary Budget Officer information, saying it was classified, commercially confidential. Nonetheless, the PBO says this project now has a net negative value of $600 million. And that one of the issues that's emerged is that the cost overruns are so high that an agreement was made that the oil companies will not have to pay the commercial tolls, that they will be subsidized. Would you confirm whether that's true or not?
Thank you, honorable member, for your question. Mr. Chair, Trans Mountain is a mega project. This is actually the largest infrastructure project in Canada right now, and it's highly complex. The report in which you referred, I'm not intimately familiar with the.
Okay, sorry, I got to stop you there. So you didn't bother to read the Parliamentary Budget Officer report? That really worries me. If you're taking $21 billion of taxpayers' money and you don't read the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report, I find that. So I'll get to my question again. I want to know an answer. It's given the cost overruns were so high, there wasn't an oil company on the planet that would use it unless it was heavily subsidized to the tune of 78% of the tolls would be paid by the taxpayer. Is that true? Yes or no?
The project is a very complex project, and there are increases in costs. And
$21 billion. So it's about the tolls, because that's where you make your money back. That's how us taxpayers get our money back. So if no oil company could use it without it being subsidized, that is what we've been told. Our taxpayers subsidizing the use of this pipeline for oil companies to the tune of 78% of the cost of what the toll would be.
Taxpayers are not subsidizing this project. This project is commercially viable, and as you're likely aware, the government of Canada intends
on selling this project. Are the tolls at commercial rates? Or are they capped at 22%?
The tolls are negotiated with the shippers at what are very reasonable rates. I'm happy to get back to you with detail.
Can you get us the detail of what the actual percentage cost of shipping will be? Because what we've been told is that they have had it capped at 22% of the real cost, given the massive overruns. Can you provide us with documentation to confirm or deny that?
I'd like to come back to you on that. As you're probably aware, CDEV is the holding company that holds this asset as a subsidiary. The nature of your questions are more detailed, and I'd like the opportunity to revert back to you on that.
Well, I'm officially requesting whether or not this is true, so I'm asking you to get that information to our committee. Thank you.
Thank you. We are out of time on that one. To finish off this round, we do have a 5 minute for the Conservatives and a 5 minute for the Liberals. And so we'll go over to starting with Ms. Stubbs, who's going to share her time with Mr. Patzer. So Ms. Stubbs, over to you for your start of the 5 minute round.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly, of course, Conservatives supported the Trans Mountain expansion, but also believe that it should be completely built, owned, operated, and paid for by the private sector if only the government had provided the legal and political certainty to allow that proponent to go ahead and build that project after they had also approved it. So I also, either for the Department of Finance or for Elizabeth from the Canada Development Investment Corporation, whichever's appropriate, either or both maybe, I'm just going to quickly ask if you can provide as written submissions to this committee how much the figures for the purchase cost of TMX from Kinder Morgan, just so it's on the record, the projected cost of TMX by the private sector proponent when it was originally proposed, the current projected cost of construction of the Trans Mountain expansion, what was the projected completion date when it was first announced by its private sector proponent, and what is the projected completion date now. And if there is any information that can be provided in written form about the status of the consideration of new ownership, I think that we'd all appreciate that too. And then I would just pass my questions over to my colleague, Jeremy.
We'd be pleased to provide that information in writing.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start with Natural Resources Canada. And finance, you might want to jump in on this one as well too. Kind of touches on both of your departments. How much of the equalization formula payment from the provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta has been based on natural resource revenues from oil and gas?
Daniel Dufour from NRCan. I'll have to defer to my finance colleagues on this question.
We will have to take this and share with our colleagues in the Federal Provincial Relation branch to see if there's a way to provide you with something.
Yeah, because if you could get them to table a document to the committee with that information, that would be extremely, extremely helpful. Thank you. Let's see here. This is more for the environment team here. This is kind of it touches on agriculture, but it comes through environment. But so for the agricultural clean technology program, I understand the funding for the adoption stream has gone out, and on the recipient list there were 139 projects that were approved. Only 5 of them were for Saskatchewan. This program was for grain dryers. It was for basically for the agricultural sector to be able to transition, but it's from the environmental lens. I'm just wondering if finance or environment have any insight as to how this program decided which projects to fund, and was the criteria based on environmental or economic impact?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. And the honourable member is quite right that would be a program administered by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. I would, and if the clerk would like to follow up with our colleagues in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, I'm sure they'd be happy to share some information. I would say the premise of the question is quite right, that all sectors need to advance in terms of decarbonization, and on the agricultural side, we need to continue to invest, as we know that the farmers that provide not only food to this table are also wonderful stewards of our land, and efforts are required to drive further in terms of driving down greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, and then just lastly for environment, I definitely represent a few communities again who are impacted by the just transition. There's an economic development group called South Saskatchewan Ready, and they've come up with a very detailed plan and some feasibility studies for the entire south region of Saskatchewan, and for what they're going to do after the government eliminates their sole and main driver of the local economy. But we've seen audits from the Auditor General talking about how the program's been an absolute failure so far. So I'm just wondering, what's your department going to do to make sure that these communities are not left behind, as they are, as being indicated they are?
Happy to take this one for Natural Resources Canada on the just transition. Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The audit's recommendation, we certainly accept, and we're action. I think it was narrower in scope and limited time involved in terms of the audit itself, but we're certainly looking at, we would argue that there has been a lot that's been accomplished in a tremendous, over the time that we've had over the past few years to support economic growth and job creation across the country. Over the past 2 years, what we've seen is significant investment that have been made in terms of supporting economic recovery, climate action, skills and training that will create sustainable jobs. And this is once again across the board. There's over $1 billion that's been invested in workforce training and support for workers, including in sectors undergoing these transitions, and NR is heavily investing in, again, energy, mining, and forestry programs that will support regions across the country in terms of sustainable job creation.
Okay, thank you.
I could go on through some of the programs.
Okay. Yeah. So now we're going to go for the last 5 minutes to Mr. Who do I have here? Sabera. So over to you for final 5 minutes of questioning.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for that. I do wish to first speak to the Canada Development Investment Corporation. I believe I can see her on the screen. Good afternoon to you. Just make sure I get Elizabeth. The CDEV is going to be tasked with the initial setup of the Growth Fund, the Canada Growth Fund. Can you speak to the broad strokes of that fund, Ms. Waidman? Excuse me.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for the question. I will turn that to my colleagues in finance.
Hi, happy to take that question. As part of the FES update, there was an annex dedicated to the Canada Growth Fund. It announced that the CGF will attract private sector investment to help meet important national economic and climate policy goals, reduce emissions, achieve Canada's climate targets, accelerate the deployment of key technologies such as low carbon hydrogen and carbon capture, utilization and storage, scale up companies that will create jobs and drive productivity and clean growth, and capitalize on Canada's abundance of natural resources and strengthen critical supply chains to secure Canada's future economic and environmental well-being. It's going to be a new public investment vehicle that will operate at arm's length from the federal government. It will use a broad suite of financial instruments and will be capitalized with $15 billion over the next 5 years.
And it will be a catalyst for private sector investment as we the ongoing transition to a low carbon economy and to what I would say energy security, energy affordability continues. Along with the introduction and I would say response to the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States on the tax credit for clean technologies. If I can get an opinion of how powerful or how I would say productive these, I believe for the most part, the refundable tax credits on the clean technologies, on clean hydrogen, are in terms of being a catalyst for private sector investment. Do we have any idea what the multipliers are on that type of a mechanism? So we go to finance, I take it.
Thank you for your question. Sorry, there's an echo here. Okay. We don't have a specific assessment in terms of, for instance, a multiplier. We know that these credits are by any standard relatively generous to the extent that not only the rate is at least at par with what the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States introduced, and they are fully refundable, which has a significant value in terms of creating the certainty for taxpayers that they will actually get the money regardless of their financial position or tax position. The fact that they are provided upfront is also, it has a significant value, particularly in that sector, which typically calls for relatively high discount rates. So overall, we are confident that these credits will have a positive effect on investment in these key sectors.
Thank you, Mr. Jovanovic. The response, I believe, in the Fez to the Inflation Reduction Act was appropriate and obviously quite timely. Today, Bloomberg, in one of its analysis, noted that Canada is now a close second with regards to battery supply chain. That Canada's recent investment in upstream clean technology supply, increasing demand in the USMCA, increases the country's competitiveness. And we've laid out $3.8 billion in our critical mineral strategy. A lot of that funding will flow to companies that I know my colleague MP Lapointe's area of Ontario. And I do want to again ask in terms of the tax credits that we've also introduced will certainly assist that. How quickly can we get the funds flowing from the $3.8 billion critical mineral strategy? And I take it that would be either for finance or even natural resources or even environment, because they overlap on all three. So whoever wants to jump in, it would be great.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question for Natural Resources Canada here. I mean, again, so Budget 2022, announced the $3.8 billion to implement, Canada's first ever critical mineral strategy, and obviously there's going to be significant engagement in development of that strategy. It's looking at providing funding, on a range of industrial activities from geoscience to exploration to, mineral processing, manufacturing, recycling applications, and it includes some funding that will go towards research, development, and technology deployments. There's multiple ramifications to this. So obviously, I will just say that right now the consultation process is is closed. So there was public consultation period that lasted till mid-September. And right now, the Department of Natural Resources is reviewing all the feedback that has been received following a consultation. And the hope is to publish the strategy by the end of this calendar year, so by the end of 2022.
Peut-être John qui reste le temps pour.
Well, perhaps there's still time for a very quick question which could be answered in writing because it's not yet 6 p.m. A very, very quick one.
The second round. And so I said we'd try to get through the second round. That's what we've done. We can, anyway, yeah, I'd like to conclude at this point just because we are going to be bumping up against 6 o'clock, which is a hard stop time. So I do want to thank all of the guests, the officials for being here today. Thank you for your insights and your patience while we had the vote. It's greatly appreciated. Through our clerk, we will be following up with many of you for items that were requested in writing, and so expect to be hearing from the clerk on that. I just want to mention that on Thursday, we will be back to hear from the regional development agencies on this study, and we do have 2 representatives from the Canada Energy Regulator that have confirmed attending for Thursday, so that's great news from them. And one final quick thing, there's been a public statement made from one of our members, Ms. Yvonne Jones, that she is battling breast cancer, and I just wanted to know if the committee would be supportive of me sending a card of well wishes from the committee on the committee's behalf.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks very much. And folks, with that, great meeting, and we're adjourned.